Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the extraordinary meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at North Norfolk District Council on the 8th of May 2024. And the first item on our agenda is to receive apologies for absence.
I've received apologies from Councillors Butakova and Hankins.
Thank you. Substitutes?
Councillor Fisher and Councillor.
Sure. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest in respect of today's business? Yeah. Item 4 is call in of the Rocket House Chroma. That is to consider a call-in request regarding the decision by Cabinet on the Rocket House Chroma at its meeting on the 15th of April 24. Perhaps I should just say that this, of course, is a single item agenda meeting, and to that extent it is extraordinary. And it is also extraordinary in that it is quite prescribed in the way in which the meeting will be run today. So I think there are two things that I need to say with regard to that. And one is, the first is that we will be following a very set procedure, and that procedure is described in our papers at Appendix Appendix A, I think it is. So it's got the call-in procedure there set very clearly, and we will be following that point by point in much the same way as we do some other meetings that we have at the council from time to time, planning in particular, and others that follow a set procedure with time limits on them. And the second point that I think is worth making is that we need to be careful about the scope of today's meeting, in the sense that the subject matter is quite set and is contained within a set scope. So we need to keep our focus on the essence of the call-in, and any temptations for us to stray beyond that will not be helpful, and I may have to bring us back on track. But let's just see how we go. Before I open it up, I just will ask the monitoring officer whether you would wish to add anything to the procedure that we have to follow today, and any regard to sort of rules of procedure that we might need to follow.
I think the general procedure is in the procedure note. The only thing I would add is caution in regard to our exempt agenda, Appendix G.
Thank you. Right. So turning to the call-in procedure, you will see that the first part of that covers matters that were prior to the meeting. So these set out 1, 2, and 3 there, which were steps in terms of preparing for this meeting today, and so they have been completed. The only thing that I'm not sure about is item 3, where it says any further evidence relating to the decision in question must be submitted to the monitoring officer at least one clear day preceding the call-in meeting to allow due consideration.
No further evidence or information was received.
Thank you. Then, that being the case, we pick up the procedure then at the second A on that list, which just to make sure it's the procedure for the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and that sets out those numbers down there, the order in which we will be dealing with the matter today. So item 1 is those councillors calling in the decision will be given collectively 10 minutes introduction to explain their reasons and the evidence of the call-in. So just to revert back to page 11, the call-in request is made on behalf of Councillor Fitch-Tillett, Councillor Vickers and Councillor Cushing. So you are the presenting members today. And I think at that point, I should hand over to you. Have you made a decision with regard to how you wish to present your information today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I've agreed that I will present the information.
Right, then I will hand over to you then, Councillor Cushing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The decision to undertake a call-in is one that we have not taken lightly. And indeed, I believe this is the first time it's been done since the 2019 election. Indeed, it may be a long time and before that since it was last done. Councillor Fitch-Tillett, Vickers and I feel so strongly about what we witnessed at the 15th of April Cabinet that we felt we had no other choice but to request this. It must be emphasised, as you have already stated, that it is the process and the information that was made available to make the decision that we are here to consider today, not the decision itself. This is predicated on the basis that key decisions made by Cabinet and indeed the Council should be transparent for taxpayers and residents who fund this Council. When it comes to making decisions of a financial magnitude, we should expect that multiple options would be considered and costed, and a detailed business case developed for that option to be presented to Cabinet for approval. As we will demonstrate, this was sadly lacking at the 15th of April Cabinet. I will briefly cover the background that led to that actual Cabinet. The dire issues with the building resulted in a report to the 4th of September Cabinet 2023, which are detailed on page 51 of our agenda. You will note that these are in purple papers, which means that they cannot be disclosed to the public and are for councillors' eyes only. What we can see, though, is that there are a number of options that are on the table. One thing we can all easily agree on, that there are no easy options for Rocket House. The Cabinet agreed on this 8th of January to spend £50,000 on exploratory work to identify the extent and the severity of the issues with the building. This brings us to the issue in question, the decision made at the 15th of April Cabinet, which was to refurbish Rocket House. This is on page 35 of our agenda. This runs to 5 pages and simply states that the Council commits to spend nearly £830,000 plus VAT to repair the building. It does not even state whether VAT is actually recoverable on that sum, nor does it mention the sizable sum paid to Daniel O'Connell Associates to oversee the work. This means that the actual estimate is well in excess of £830,000 plus the £50,000 already allocated in January for the investigative work. Though mention is made in various papers that it is essential to obtain some external funding in order for the repairs to be considered to be financially viable, there is no indication that this is achievable. This report does not explain what the £830,000 will actually be spent on. In the agenda item for the September Cabinet on page 19, it lists several issues with the building, which I will list. Extensive damp with the walls, which is plaguing the building. Gas boilers need to be repaired. Radiators and encased pipework in concrete are corroding. Windows require replacement. The public lift needs to be replaced. Balcony supports are corroding. Some decking boards need to be replaced. Plus, additional work is required to improve the energy efficiency to reduce carbon emissions. What assurance do we have that the £830,000 will cover the costs for all of the above? Therefore, there is a risk that £830,000 will not be sufficient to fix the issues with the building. How can the Cabinet make a decision without understanding the scope of the work to be undertaken and the associated costs? So what we expected to be in the Cabinet paper was as follows: an options analysis paper to explain why repairing the building is better than any of the other options detailed in the September 23 report. In addition, a detailed business case for the refurbishment of Rocket House. This should list all the work that needs to be undertaken with cost estimates for each and their timeframes. The business case should articulate the benefits as well. What income can be expected from Rocket House going forward? What is the return on investment timescale? Is the investment viable without external funding? What contingency has been put aside to allow for inflation or other potential costs? What are the ongoing annual costs of the building? Now, these can be split into those that are required to maintain the building and also those which are required to repair damage from one-off events like storm surges. And we've had several of these in the past, so looking at what we've paid in the past would be a good indication of what we might expect going forward. Another key element is a risk assessment to quantify all the risks of the building going forward. For example, there have already been 2 storm surges in 2007 and 2013. It is a reasonable assumption that there will be one at some point in the future and possibly near in the future as well. How certain are we that the remedial action will solve the issues of water getting into the building? Are there any financial implications arising from the position of the RNLI as well? It's something that could be included in that risk report. Then we have the issue of the buildings and contents insurance. The whole viability of insurance in the future must be open to question. Is the level of risk of a storm surge, inundation, a reasonable and insurable risk? Is this something the authority will have to shoulder, or will it be a cost of this, making it unaffordable in future? In summary, the gravity of this decision demands that it is evidence-led with facts and estimates underpin the decision to refurbish Rocket House. This is especially true at a time when the council's revenue finances are under extreme pressure. We need to think carefully before we add to this. This has been a seriously flawed process. We have no cost estimates for each element that totals the 830,000. Will the 830,000 resolve all the issues with the building? If not, what other work is required and how much will it cost? We do not have any idea of the financial viability of the building after repairs are carried out. Also, what are the ongoing costs and risks for the building? Also, nothing mentioned there is about the lifts. We look at the lifts which were built back in 2005. We note that sort of mobility aids have improved, which questions whether the lift, I guess, is still appropriate. Flip side of that also that mobility scooters have increased in size. So is the lift still of the right size? I don't know the answer to those questions, but have those points been considered? Also, this council needs an audit trail of how decisions to spend sizable sums of money have been reached. This includes a catalogue of the range of options covered, costed, and the risks that were assessed to justify the decisions made. All this information should be explicit and transparent for members and residents. For all these reasons, I urge my colleagues on this committee to refer this back to the Cabinet to request that the business case information is required in order to justify the decision that they have made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. Right, that moves us on to past item 2 in our procedure to item 3. That requires me to decide on whether there's any more than one reason for the call-in. And as I understand it so far, there is only the one reason for the call-in. Moving on to item 4. Item 4 is for the Cabinet member or Cabinet members, if there's more than one, who will be speaking on behalf of the Cabinet, and officers if they wish to add anything at this stage. And for the benefit of the recording, we have the Leader of the Council, Councillor Adams, and we have the portfolio holder, Councillor Shires, and we have the relevant manager, Officer Garford, here as well. So over to you, Councillor Adams. Do you wish to speak on behalf of, or do you wish to, how do you wish to handle it?
Thanks. I will try and cover as many of the points as I can. Forgive me, my voice is a little bit weak today. So first of all, I just wanted to say I am disappointed we did have to come together today with a call-in. I think it's a format that does exclude members of the public, and sadly there were 3 members of the public that wanted to speak today on this item. So you know, just a point of reflection, really. There's possibly a better way of doing this. We would have been very happy to have the meeting have an item on the formal open scrutiny agenda. Sorry, I'll try and speak a bit more forcefully to try and push through. But let's go into the detail. So the areas we considered in respect of the future of the Rocket House are, of course, detailed in the previous papers and the exempt appendices, and we will disclose as much as we possibly can, of course, without disclosing the details on the leases, the legal issues, the business involved. There's also the factor of the cliff face, otherwise known as the falls, which is covered within a covenant. And none of these issues should be discussed in any great depth in public. All members were, of course, invited to the site visits and an all-member briefing, where much of the information was accessible. I don't believe everyone in the room was obviously in attendance, but we've tried to keep members, you know, abreast of these developments as we have moved along. But ultimately, the decision was made at the capital budget meeting in January, so therefore not out of the budget or policy framework. We needed to open new discussions with the RNLI as per the item on the last cabinet agenda for the interim lease arrangements, to delegate to relevant officers for the commencement of the project. And, you know, we wanted to keep it on the agenda for continued transparency. So, but there is that factor. We can't disclose all of the information there. And that's why some of this is obviously in those purple papers, but we will endeavour to, I suppose, disclose as much as we can. We obviously agreed to bring the paper back following the scheme of investigation, which Christopher mentioned, and you might have seen Steve walk in with these gigantic bits of concrete over here. So these are the core samples from the building, and obviously this informed our officers' work and helped us make a decision really on the future of the building. So you see that very large bit of concrete. I mean, there's no reason really you can't pass these around. I mean, obviously they are quite heavy, but it's absolutely fine for you to do that. What you can't see on this side is there is some of the damp-proof membrane. I believe there's also two of the, well done, Renata. So the workers that carried this out said it was actually among the toughest concrete that ever drilled, and it broke drill bits. And you know, there's been a lot said about a structural defect. It's not a structural defect as such. We've seen a failure to damp-proof membrane, which you can see on the bottom there, and that is likely or possibly due to the tidal surge in 2007. So the first issues noted as early as 2011, but talked about publicly in 2014. This has been known about across multiple administrations, but it's time to do something about it. We can't continue going on like this. What this did do for us was exclude the worst possibilities. We thought it could be a lot worse than it was. So this resulted in us being able to come up with a scheme of works, which included tanking out the building primarily to deal with the damp, and all electrical and mechanical requirements. So besides what has been mentioned, you know, we've got the windows, the decking, the boiler. So those are issues you would expect to start to fail after this amount of time. Obviously, the decking is in an exterior location that is to be replaced, for instance, by the decking we use on the pier. That's obviously the smallest of the items, but it's all part of this package of works, which with a fair wind, we would be able to hopefully complete within a 32-week period and within the provisional £1 million budget. And that's inclusive of all of the works that are required, and will also enable the building to be more efficient, to help us reach relevant net zero goals in addition. So I should also talk about the other options in terms of the building. So there are significant points I want to cover in terms of the implications of not refurbishing. So the 5 items that I'm about to cover altogether would be involved in the demolition of the property. And in fact, they would cost more than the refurbishment. So first of all, as you are aware,
Can I just,
can I answer the questions? Is that all right?
yes, all right.
Yeah.
I'll pause you at after that.
Sure. Yeah, I won't be too much longer, but obviously I want to try and cover the introductory points. Then obviously there's an open-ended time realistically, isn't there, to come back and ask any questions you want to.
I'm just more concerned about the subject matter, and I've got a hand raised in councillor Vickers.
Yeah, I think councillor Adams is speaking at length about the reasons why the cabinet made the decisions, and that's not the point of the matter here. The point of the matter here is that there was no costed options, not in the purple papers or anywhere else, and no business case. We're not questioning the decision here or the worthiness of the decision, other than that it should be an informed decision, fully costed.
Well, I'm going to.
Thank you. Just before we go on any further, I am aware the monitoring officer wishes to, and well, do you wish to speak?
Well, I was just going to say, I think we should let Councillor Adams finish before we start. He may well get onto those things.
If I may, I think we need to be cautious in regards to what is discussed, because the options are only in the exempt papers.
Thank you.
So
Right,
one of the
over to you.
questions that Christopher did cover is, why are we repairing? Why is repairing the building better? So I'm seeking to cover that point. It's there in the recording if you want to go over it again. So, it's important we do set the record straight and discuss the reasons why the cabinet has come to the conclusion it has. So first of all, as you know, we've got a successful business upstairs in the Rocket House building. They have a lease, of course. Ending that lease would come at financial cost. That's item 1. The second point is there is the removal of the toilet provisions on the east side of the beach, if you like, the east side of town. It's the only remaining toilet facility, in fact, to the east now. And Cromer Beach had nearly 1.4 million visitors recorded last year, split roughly between east and west. It's the busiest beach in our district. And the toilet would frankly need replacing. So as you're aware from previous capital investments, that would be at significant cost, probably around £250,000, if not more, to cope with the volume of usage required in such a location. The removal of the lift, and this has been said a lot during these discussions, there's a trickle-down impact from this building to other businesses and concessions, some of which we own, notably Cromer Pier, of course. But the removal of the lift would have some significant implications in disadvantaging those with access requirements. It's difficult to cost up the replacement of a lift, but there would be some hard to measure impact as well on those concessions. Obviously, Cromer Pier, it's making a little bit of money again now with profit share, but obviously the costs of a new lift would be significant, likely around the same as a toilet. Demolition of the building itself, likely to be in excess of £550,000. So lots of material to dispose of there. But this is where it gets a bit more complicated. So we, the district council, inherited the land. It was purchased by the Cromer Urban District Council in the late 20s. The previous landowner had put a covenant on the property, meaning that we are responsible for the maintenance of the cliffs known as the falls within the covenant. And so we are obligated here. And there has been previously some challenge from freeholders in the area who benefit from the covenant. This building, of course, is built into the cliff. So if you imagine, it's almost become a retaining wall itself. So taking it away would be at consequence. There would be work needed there to make good and reassure ourselves that the cliff was retained. So all of those items together, almost certainly in excess of the £1 million. We also considered relocation. And this was always not something we could have done. So
Can I just stop you at that point? I'm aware the monitoring officer wants to speak.
Thank you. I'm just concerned that the options haven't been mentioned in public before, to my understanding, and this is exempt information.
I don't believe, Cara, that I'm disclosing anything that would be confidential. I'm trying to avoid discussing leases, individuals, but I do want to use this as an opportunity to set the record straight on some of the assumptions, that perhaps even misinformation. You know, we've read recently in the newspaper that there were structural defects. These are misunderstandings that propagate themselves. So I feel it's acceptable just to cover as much of the information as I can without disclosing anything that could prejudice future discussions.
I think that the reasons, as they weren't in the original public report, were considered as exempt information because they could potentially impact the parties as well as the council. So I think to discuss those in public session, there would need to be consideration of whether to keep that exempt report exempt. Maybe stop the recording for a moment and consider that
Yeah.
point, to what extent any information in the exempt report can be made public.
Sure. Well, can I come back? I mean, what I would say is, obviously, as we've moved on, things have progressed. You know, if we'd have disclosed lots of information in an early stage, it could have prejudiced discussions, it could have impacted discussions. I think things have moved on to an extent, you know, following the last cabinet, that, you know, I want to try and ensure that members are appraised as much as possible of our consideration of all of the facts, which I believe was the purpose of today.
Sorry, Chair, if it helps. I understood that the purpose of the call-in was around the decision that was made at the last cabinet meeting. So actually the focus, information that's developed since then, I don't think is that relevant, because the call-in specifically about what cabinet considered at that meeting of 14th of April, what that information was, what it was in public, and what a member of the public would consider in terms of that information, the decision that was made by cabinet. And to pick up the monitoring officer's point, if committee does want to go into exempt information, it has the opportunity to do so, to go into a private session if it so wants to.
Thank you for that. I think there is a concern here around scope and the necessity to go that far back, if you like. Well, I think the essence, as I understand the call-in, is one around process that led you as a cabinet to make that decision. That's where our focus should be. And much of the that information that you've said, I think, is probably understood by many members, although some of it hasn't been shared with us. But I think the thrust of the issue today is, what information did you as a cabinet have that we as members have not seen, that have justified you and logically led you to make this decision?
Well,
It's as narrow as that.
yeah, but obviously, you know, there's the history that led to the conclusions that we've come to. So, you know, that's the matter of the fact. And, you know, we did obviously also consider the relocation of the building. And that is something we discussed at cabinet beforehand. So, you know, it just wouldn't have been possible, just to round off the point, for us to meet those costs. It would have taken, you know, a large external grant to do so. Even if, say, we were able to offer the value of some land, that could have taken many years to realise pursuing grant, something we couldn't have committed to. So certainly, you know, a big punt in the dark, and you know, certainly something unlikely to emerge in the remaining months of a government or the start of a new one, perhaps. So those were the alternatives that we considered, and the costs were and are greater than the refurbishment, and not just in terms of financially, but you've also got to consider, and we've heard an awful lot about it publicly, the cultural impacts. But as I've said today, there are quality social impacts as well. So, can I carry on in terms of answering Christopher's points?
Well, yes, I suppose it would be opportune just to ask you, where is that information? You've mentioned that, but where is that information, and where would members access that information?
So some of that is within the purple papers. You know, the areas were outlined within them. You presumably read them before today, and some of them were considered in discussion among cabinet members. Members were all invited to the all-member briefing. But as I said quite simply earlier on, the reason for the last cabinet meeting was to delegate to the relevant officer to open the negotiations on the interim lease arrangements with the RNLI, and really to keep it in the public domain. The actual decision was the capital budget in January. We were asked about the finances of the building and whether it can support itself. So, and you know, we should be completely honest about this. The building won't wash its own face, but you know, it should be seen as far more than an item on a profit and loss balance sheet. As I hope I've tried to demonstrate, you know, it plays a wider contribution to the local economy, maybe in Cromer, but beyond that, it's a big visitor destination, and it's easy, I think, to look at sometimes at these items as individuals rather than a whole package. So the risk of surge, and as I said earlier on, you know, I do believe that the initial damage may have been caused by a surge, but it is an insured asset. We've demonstrated our ability to respond very effectively to storm surges before. I'm just trying to remember the years now: 2007, 2014, and 17, 13, and 17. Yeah. So I can remember them all in person, but trying to remember the year is sometimes a bit of a challenge, isn't it? These works will make the building more resilient, and obviously we'd be seeking a guarantee as a result of them taking place. So as I've covered already, 32-week program, all of the tanking, all of the electrical mechanical components that have deteriorated due to age, and I believe the building has a long future ahead of it, despite the unfortunate financial implications on ourselves. It wasn't our starting position, of course, I should say. It was funded by the EU, the Eastern Shires, cost about £3.2 million in today's money when it was built. There was a capital contribution from the RNLI. But the maintenance issues have started to bite in recent years as things have started to fail. But before that, of course, it was quite a relatively well-performing lease. But we do own the building, and there are all sorts of implications, as I've outlined, in terms of not doing. So I'm very pleased to sort of take away any alternative suggestions as well members want to consider, but I don't believe there are any. That was the very logical decision that Cabinet had to make in the end with this consideration. Thank you.
Does that complete your, yeah, I should just add that as the procedure says, that that was an opportunity for you or your cabinet members or officers to add anything at this stage. You've obviously elected to add quite a lot to that. But I think we do need to move on to item 5. And that takes us to those councillors calling in the decision will have 20 minutes to question the cabinet members and officers. So this is the time when questions, if you like, are going to be asked of you. This may be done individually or through one of them on behalf of them. So I don't know whether you want to do that individually or collectively.
I think we'll do it individually, Mr.
Thank you. Then over to you. First question to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Be pleased to hear I've got 2 very short, simple questions, and it's all about procedure. First of all, you spent 50k on survey costs. How was this survey tendered? Please, could I have an answer on that?
Thank you. The survey didn't cost 50,000. It was procured through our procurement rules. So that was the original budget, but it didn't cost that level of money.
Okay, your leader just sort of said 50,000. Okay. Now, very simple. I'm putting my accountancy hat on here, Mr. Chairman. I would have liked to see in the purple papers a straightforward spreadsheet for income and expenditure. And then we would have had all the figures. We wouldn't have to be here today. So why was that not presented? Thank you.
There is a spreadsheet with all the options that details the rental income, the costs involved with that project or each option, inflation, contingency. And that background information was in the spreadsheet, wasn't included, but that information then went to developing the options appraisal, which was in the September Cabinet report.
Wasn't very clear. Simple spreadsheet would have been much more helpful, but never mind.
That's the figures.
Just following up on what Councillor Fitch-Tillett said, you say the spreadsheet wasn't in the purple papers because I didn't see any properly costed options.
No, it's background information that led to that options appraisal being produced.
Was that available to all members or just to Cabinet?
Exempt information, yes, because it includes confidential information regarding leases and rental income.
Not quite sure I understand that. So I just want to explain to my fellow committee members that the reason this is about financial probity. I mean, all I'm asking for is that this decision goes back to Cabinet for properly costed options paper and business case, nothing more, nothing less. It's about process, not the decision. So my question to either of the portfolio holders, either Councillor Shires or Councillor Adams, is in view of what's being discussed about storm searches and future risks, have we quantified the costs of those future risks when coming to the decision that you've reached? I mean, we can't risk shackling future councils and residents of North Norfolk to what might become a money pit. So all I'm asking for, have you quantified those future risks?
I'll address the first point of the information. I sit at this committee almost every meeting where I'm told that there's not enough information, there's too much information, and there's a different way for information to be presented. So I would really like this committee to work on that, because it's quite frustrating for officers and yourselves, apparently, when you aren't getting the information you want. So that addresses the simplicity of the information issue. The prediction of storm surges, if there is anybody that is able to predict storm surges, then I should think they're about to come into some significant business globally with the massive changes in climate change. However, we are covered by insurance. We did discuss beach huts and storm surges at our last meeting. So unfortunately, whilst we can't predict every storm surge, we are insured against them.
I'm not asking you to be Mystic Meg. I mean, I know you can't predict it, but it's a foreseeable and almost inevitable risk. So you're quite right that at the last meeting, we discussed beach huts, and there's general agreement amongst colleagues on the committee that officers should be asked to make an economic case for the council continuing to own and maintain beach huts. And that's the spirit in which I've called in this decision, because I don't think that a proper economic case, properly costed options have been made. And that's all I'm asking for, that it goes back to Cabinet for the requisite financial reports that I think all members deserve. We just can't risk shackling future councils and the residents of North Norfolk to what might become a money pit.
Do you have a question, councillor Vickers?
Yes. Could you tell me what your sources of external funding are, please?
So I think I tried to cover this, there aren't any viable sources of external funding we have located. I mean, if one obviously were to pop up tomorrow, we would endeavour to try and secure it, as we do, for all sorts of other things, both successfully and unsuccessfully on many occasions previously. This has obviously been taking up an awful lot of our time at a strategic level, trying to find a solution to this particular problem, and one we're keen to finally resolve after so many years being kicked down the road, really. So it's if a funding opportunity arose, but there's not anything immediately obvious. What of course there is there's the rental from the tenant upstairs, and it's fair to say, without going into any detail, some of these revenue streams will be reviewed in future years in line with those tenancies. That's something we as cabinet members obviously will be kept abreast of. Lucy certainly is the relevant portfolio holder, closely involved in that process. Possible that would go back to business planning and sometimes even to a cabinet meeting to renew, sometimes increase leases. That happens as a matter of course at this or in other locations across our property portfolio. But just to touch on something you said, and being honest and upfront about it, the building won't wash its face financially. It's been built from grant funding previously, a huge program of work at the time. Both Cromer and Fakenham were benefiting from quite a bit of external funding in the early 2000s, and this was one project within the Cromer regeneration scheme. So we didn't make a huge capital contribution initially, so we haven't had to worry about sort of it paying back as such in the way that I suppose validly you're asking the question now. What's the possibility of that? And it won't, but we've got to look at it more than, you know, a profit-making asset on a balance sheet, because there are different constituent parts to it. There's the toilet, there's the lift, there's the museum, and you know, a very, very successful eatery upstairs, possibly the most successful independent eatery in the district. You've probably all been there. It's always very busy, very good employer for the town, but it's just a very important cog, I think, in the Cromer economy, but draw for visitors, very much so. And we've had correspondence from people out of district concerned about the loss of access and all of those other things that could arise. So, you know, all of these things combined, and, you know, just the logical conclusions really that it would be far more costly to go an alternative path in terms of relocation or demolition, led us very firmly towards the refurbishment that we've considered both at full council in January and in the subsequent cabinet meetings.
Could you just clarify, in your words, the building will not wash its face?
Sorry, Chairman, this is just time for the caller in to ask questions. Committee will have
Okay, I
time.
just think clarification. Yep, all right, we'll come back to that. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some questions for Councillor Adams, if I may, and I'd like to get back to some of the nitty-gritty in terms of focus. I'd like to understand precisely what actually is in the scope, because in terms of following up the point that Councillor Shah has just made, the detail, well, there's none of that detail actually in the report that they went to the Cabinet to explain actually what is actually being covered by the work. So I listed a number of items, so perhaps I'll just, as a prompt, I'll go through those. I suppose part of the things that we're going to be dealing with as part of the decision would be the extensive damp in the walls. So what is the cost estimate for that element of the work?
I'm just trying to see if I can extract some of the detail. But that's the all-inclusive. I mean, it's hard to give you a detailed breakdown other than it was an all-inclusive, you know, so you've got the tanking, you've got the heating, the windows, the decking. What have I missed there? The lift you've mentioned, of course, it's not been, it's problematic recently. But that is included within that 828 plus VAT budget, which obviously isn't inclusive of VAT. And that will fit into our forecast 1 million provisional capital budget. There's a lot to do there in terms of that project. There's procurement, there's an enhanced project planning process to go through. But that is all inclusive, including the removal of the artifacts from the museum. I should say the majority of, I don't think we've covered this, the majority of the works are obviously downstairs because it's tanking out, it's the floor. So the museum items, the HF Bailey, the prominent boat, which most of you I hope are familiar with, would all need to come out. And then obviously an extensive program of works, and it will follow itself through the building, getting all of those individual items done. Hopefully, of course, not impacting on the tenants upstairs in their business. So, but there will of course be some impacts on some of the provisions, certainly the public toilet facilities, because one of the walls we need to get to is, and the floors is certainly located on the ground floor within the area that will need to be tanked out. So that will be lost for a period of time. So there are some impacts on members of the public as a result of that, of course. But obviously, to secure the future of the building and all the services that it provides.
I may, so what I actually heard there is that you don't know how that £830,000 is actually calculated. Because one of the things I would have expected for in the cabinet, indeed any cabinet of whatever political collection, is if you're going to spend £830,000 on something, I'd want to know actually what the composite parts of that actually are and how that was calculated. And what also, if I may follow up, is you run through things. So what I wanted to check as part of that, are you saying that the damp walls will be, as part of 830,000, that will cover the damp walls? That will cover the gas boiler?
Yeah,
That will cover the radiators,
Yeah, so
windows, lift?
indeed I am. But what I
Everything?
should, I suppose, add to what I've said, obviously, we've involved surveyors who've undertaken the core samples. We've had an enhanced report undertaken that informs us of the work that needs to be done. A quantity surveyor has costed that work, which includes everything you've said, into a report. Then we need to go out to procurement. A project plan needs to be developed based upon that work, and then the work obviously takes place. So it's all there. We're obviously not going to be in a position to share the quantity surveyor's report and all of that detail. That's certainly that's detail that exists, but it's probably not appropriate that it goes out everywhere.
Coming back to the point, I do not begin to think it is unreasonable for a cabinet making a decision of that magnitude to actually understand how that £830,000 is actually arrived at, because clearly you don't. You say everything is included. I have to say, if you're looking about repairing the lifts as well, that strikes me as it's actually a great deal of money for what you're actually intending to do with it. If you're talking about refurbishing the toilets as well. So everything will be done after the £830,000. That building will be good as new. There'll be no likelihood of anything else that's been missed, no extra costs. And you'll give a guarantee that you will not be coming back to this council to ask for any more money other than the 832. And it'd be nice actually if the cabinet members could answer that, not have the officers.
Well, I think, I've covered the point several times over. Yes.
Council waffle, you haven't actually given me any.
Well, I've not given you council waffle, and I find that quite offensive actually, because we've taken the time to come here today to respond to many of these points and questions. Sorry?
I don't think you have a lot of choice, really.
I wouldn't have to have attended, to be honest, Christopher. I could, I've just recovered from an illness. I could have stayed in bed quite happily this morning, to be honest with you. But there we are. The project includes all of the items you've mentioned. Of course, I'm no engineer, I'm no builder. That's why we've got the experts in to cover these points. That's why we've got the people to do the survey works. That's why we've got quantity surveyors to give estimates on the value of the work. That's why we do this. That informs our decisions. So of course, I wouldn't personally be able to describe everything. I have a vague idea of what tanking is. I obviously understand the heating system will start to become redundant after about 20 years. I understand that decking will rot, etc. All of these things are included within the scope of the work, so I can't really go much further than that.
I don't, if I may, I don't understand any more of those either, but all I'd simply do is, I don't understand how radiators and that stuff, but if that's actually part of the revert, how much will that element of the work cost? If you just itemize that, break that 830 down into its component parts, that's not an unreasonable thing for these councillors or indeed all of our residents to actually have access to. But anyway, we've laboured that point. If I may, Mr. Chairman, come back another question. You mentioned VAT. Is it actually recoverable or not? Do we know?
So the beauty of having officers and cabinet members present is that you can get all the information that you need for this meeting. And Officer Stankley's been trying to indicate for some time to answer some of the questions. So I'd be happy to defer to Officer Stankley in this instance.
Well, firstly, VAT will be recoverable. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. We only ever report costs net. We never include any VAT in our costs unless it isn't recoverable. And in this instance, it will be, so it is net VAT. Coming back to the cost of the works, we have an officer that has costed it with his expertise and knowledge, and for the works that
are contained or that he has costed, he is estimating the works to be about 830,000. Full council did approve a budget of £1 million for this work, and there will be some additional cost in terms of officer time, which we can legitimately charge to the capital budget for this. There will be other incidental minor costs that will be incurred. You know, if we find that something else needs doing at the same time, then we have that budget to do it. But as far as we're aware, the costs are to carry out all the work that is required. And the breakdown isn't necessarily, I feel, what members should be perhaps concentrating on. It is that the building will be have all its issues rectified within budget.
Good. Councillor Vickers.
Yeah, the decision, Councillor Adams, is obviously Cabinet's to make, but I think that councillors and particularly Overview and Scrutiny Committee have a right to see the rationale behind the decisions you make. And part of that rationale is costs and finance. It's not, you know, a sort of extraordinary request. All I am asking is that it goes back to Cabinet for the proper financial report so we can all see the rationale, financial and otherwise, behind. Do you agree with that, Councillor Adams? Do you think that we have the right to know and to scrutinise that?
Absolutely, you've got a valid right to do that. As I said earlier on, I thought there was a better way of doing it today. I would have obviously expected a discussion in scrutiny about this item, certainly. But as I said, there are, as we've seen before, perhaps more so at cabinet meetings, we've had a lot of members of the public attending, and I know some wanted to inform councillors today of their feeling. But going back to what I said earlier on, it was a full council decision. That was something that you, I believe, possibly may have voted against the capital budget in January, Councillor Vickers. But as I've tried to explain, a logical decision based upon the facts that refurbishment really is the only show in town in terms of what's viable. So you know, we can continue covering this ground a number of different times. I can answer the question in a different way, but you know, the answer is the same.
Well, it's actually a fairly simple request. If you're confident in your decision, then let's see the costed options and why you've come to that decision. May we please? And if so, will you support this call in?
I think that's our 20 minutes expired. Right. Having listened to the questions that you as presenting members have put and the answers given, I think it might be timely just to say that today isn't the opportunity to share with us the information that we are seeking. That isn't what this is about. What this is actually about is the process that should have revealed that information, shared that information before today, and then this particular calling would not have arisen. And I think we are erring away into detail, which I'm sure is made with the best of intentions, but actually it's outside of the scope of today in that sense. So we could spend probably all morning on this session and you telling us information that we don't know. But that's not the aim of today. The aim of today is to determine whether the calling is valid, whether the grounds for the calling are valid, in that, in reaching the decision that you have you followed reasonable process and sharing information? Have you had that information? Has that information been shared with others appropriately? So I just make that because we're just about to move to a position on our next item is to give members the opportunity to ask questions of cabinet members. And I just would like to make sure that we focus on those key issues today and not go into explanations as to why that, where that information is. You haven't given us that information. That's what the claim is. And so we want to hear more about why that is and whether or not there's steps that you would be prepared to take to remedy that. That's a matter of, anyway. Well, let's move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is members of the committee may question the cabinet members and offices. So questions from the committee, the cabinet members. Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we go back to September? And in this process, were there professionals who were instructed to look at the building, given the original bill of quantities, the original working drawings, the sectional drawings?
So any information that we had regarding that was given to the independent professional chartered surveyors to do their survey work. So we didn't have bill of quantities, but we did have plans available, and so they had that information.
Was that the original working drawings?
Yes.
So why is it that we've sat here this morning for an hour? In your report, you talk about extensive corrosion to a steel framed building, and yet we haven't heard one single word about it in any shape or form. Corrosion to a steel frame, galvanized steel frame building. Now that isn't going to be exposed. You're going to have a heck of a job to get to that. And if that integrity fails, every penny from this moment forth is wasted.
The survey did look at the corrosion as well. There are core samples, and they dismantle part of the building to be able to see.
And were the trial pits around the key stanchions?
The samples were taken from the locations that the independent surveyor determined were the best places to take them.
But their core samples are concrete, they're not steel.
Again, we are,
Well, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
we are
but it is
digressing
part of
away
the-
from.
It's part of the process here that we don't understand. There was no original bill of quantities looked at, so we don't know exactly what we're looking to refurbish. And in that process, I think that process should have included the original bill of quantities.
I think the issue here is, where is that information?
Fine,
Whether that
okay,
information is correct, incorrect, whether you believe it or not, isn't the issue. The issue is, where is the
okay,
information?
All right, where is that
Yep.
information?
I think the question's fair. I don't think we need to give Councillor Housen a hard time for asking it. I personally would like to sort of just try and give the detail you want. I know we've sort of tried to, go around the houses here a little bit, and sort of makes it sound like the department at silly walk sometimes when we're just trying to have a basic conversation about a big decision we've had to make. What I would say is the survey definitely discounted our worst fears about the building being absolutely unsalvageable. So, that's obviously why we needed to do the work. So, it's not going anywhere structurally. Just to absolutely say, it's certainly not going to float away anytime soon. It's very, very tough structurally. What's happened is a very simple failure, the damp-proof membrane getting through the day join, the pour join, or something on. I'm trying to think of the correct terminology. It's seeping around into the building. So we thought, yes, that there was a catastrophic failure there almost. That is not the picture that's emerged subsequently. As we said, we wanted to undertake that scheme of investigations and then make the decision. It appeared to be the case. But we've got some metal here. We've got some of the concrete floor samples and rear wall samples.
Okay, so in the process, are we indemnified from the surveyors and the engineers?
You mean the ones that built it originally?
No, I'm talking about those that are now giving their expert
Oh,
opinion.
okay. Can you answer that? Is that okay?
They're given their professional advice that the council has paid for, and I can see in the report that I'm looking at that they have looked at the rebar in the floor and the walls, and it's not suffering.
And they have adequate insurance, do they, if we have to
Yes.
go sue them?
Yes, they're a professional company that have been appointed to do this survey.
And do we know the extent of their liability? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a valid question. If we're spending this amount of money,
Yes.
I'm actually quite sad that you weren't at the technical briefing. Because no, that wasn't a criticism. I'm actually quite sad, Nigel. And the reason I'm quite sad is because all the information that we were given at the technical briefing, you've asked some questions that perhaps others hadn't asked at that point. But the technical briefing, just to the members who weren't elected at the time, the technical briefing was open to all members. Oh, you were all elected? No, I don't think, perhaps not. The technical briefing was designed for everybody to have a walk around the building with our officers and professionals, and to come back here to ask them any questions about the building possible. There was some really strong conversation. There was lots of questions from all political parties, and there was many questions that were answered in the room. So I just want to thank members for attending that, and just to note that as part of process, there was an offer for all members to gather as much information about the building as possible, as this is a process related conversation.
It is indeed a process, and I think you may want to consider whether or not it would have been appropriate to bring that information that was shared at that briefing in summary form forward into your business case or into your appraisal options appraisal, and that might well have been very helpful to answer that question. I am very concerned that we are getting into technical detail that's quite honestly irrelevant. Interesting though the cores are, and that's good evidence of something or other technically about the building. I'm not an engineer, and I'm not sure how many of you are engineers around sitting here today, but what we need to focus on what happened to that information. What was that taken? Where was that taken into account? Where was that properly weighed in exactly the same way as we do planning matters? And how did that decision get supported by that information? So I really must insist that we stay on that track and not get drawn down too many technical rabbit holes. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do pull me up if I'm getting stuck down a rabbit hole. I hope I won't. I'm just for sort of clarity purposes. We've not gone to tender yet on this. Obviously, that's right, isn't it? So it's
That's the next step.
that's the next step. So just to come back on some of those questions around budget specifics within that overall 830 cost. Presumably the QS or the officer who looked at those individual elements has put a cost to those. But of course, that's a best guesstimate in the sense that we wouldn't know until the tender comes back as to what those costs will be. Is that correct? And therefore, if that's the case, then we we're not 100% sure yet until we get the actual contractor cost in, and then we choose on that basis. Thank you.
So the quantity surveyor uses indices to calculate the budget cost. So that's what this is. It's a budget cost. When we go up to procurement, then that will finalize those costs. And if that varies from the budget that's been agreed, then we'll need to come back to Cabinet to detail where we are with the costs at that point.
But you're confident that those, by using those indices, that sort of cost best guesstimate is going to be roughly what will come back from the contractors?
They're the recognised indices to use to be able to budget cost, construction and repair works. So yes, I am.
Yeah, thank you. So all that information is there, but is that shareable, or does that sort of in some way prejudice the tender process if we share that before this goes out to contractors? In other words, do we have to withhold that until it is out there
I believe it would be detrimental to the council because it wouldn't create best value because there's no competitive edge if people know what the budget price is. So I think it would be harmful.
Thank you. I think that answers my question around why that information is needed to be held. Thank you.
Questions from committee members? Councillor Fletcher.
Time pressure. Some of these actually delay their solution. Seems to be on a certain line.
I apologise. I hope you could hear that.
You're on right at the end.
I'm sorry. I wasn't with the. Could you hear what I?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So, no, that's fine, Andrew. So yes, there is obviously time pressure, and in a sense, you are a bit of a risk to the project in terms of a delay. You could cause the process. The costs could increase. There are other things that could happen in terms of logistics, supplies. So you've got to get things out of the building. There might be a minor delay there, if anything. So there's certainly some time risk there that time sensitivities there, I should say, that could risk the total value of the work, which have been, as you've heard, valued within the current indices. So I would say so, absolutely. Sorry, is there something you wanted to add?
The damp is a real issue at that property. So are the other elements that we have included in the initial report that need to be dealt with. I came into this process nearly 2 years ago when the first survey landed on my desk. The tenants, their artifacts are being damaged by the damp. It's causing ill health to their staff. So we do need to make a decision, or the council needs to make a decision and move forward with it. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification, really, that a lot of the costings, had there not been the structural work, a lot of the costings would have been expected in a building of this age. I'm talking about the, toilets and the other bits, wear and tear on the heating and one thing and another. And obviously we weren't where we were with net zero when the building went ahead and was constructed, and therefore we would be expecting on any building that we owned as an asset, we would be expecting to spend a sizable sum at this point, even if we weren't involved financially so much at the beginning. Thank you.
Yes, that's correct. Boilers fail, timber gets rotten, all those things need maintenance and ultimately replacing at some point.
Councillor Holloway.
Chair, I'd just like to bring us back to why we're here, which is about the process. That's all right. I'd like to look at the Constitution. I'd like to look at page 168 and 413C. So we're talking about key controls for capital expend programs. So so this is required, a scheme and estimate, including a project plan, progress targets, and associated revenue expenditure is prepared for each capital project above 100,000 for approval by cabinet. And I get the feeling that that wasn't provided at the time. I know we're giving us all the information now, but that is not relevant, but it wasn't available at the time. That's my understanding. And responsibility of directors on the next page says that to ensure all capital proposals above 50,000 have undergone a project appraisal stating the objective, details of any alternative means of achieving the objective, the justification for the project, and the estimated capital costs in accordance with the guidance issued by the Chief Financial Officer. And I was just questioning whether those had in fact been complied with. Thank you.
Okay. Well, no, I suppose very simply, we're obviously, get to tender for the works, to procure the works. So, it will be coming back to us. There's no doubt about it. But in terms of your second point about, other options, I feel I've sort of tried to cover that as extensively as I can really now. Thank you.
Well, just to kind of pick that up, because I think that really does strike at the heart of the matter here. And this is the constitution that we work to, and this describes certain things that need to be done. And whichever word you use, you can use a variety of terms. It does seem to me that we'd like to hear more about how you have met those two particular paragraphs of the Constitution.
You have them written down already. So can I just look at your copy so I can correctly get the words?
I can read them out to you.
That would be beneficial because I believe Councillor Adams has already covered that in his statement.
So this is page 168 and 169 of the Constitution. And it's paragraph 4.13 sub C. A scheme and estimate, including project plan, progress targets, and associated revenue expenditure is prepared for each capital project above 100,000 for approval by the Cabinet. So that's 4.13 C. 4.20 says to ensure all capital proposals above 50,000 have undergone a project appraisal stating the objectives, details of any alternative means of achieving the objective, the justification for the project, and the estimated capital costs in accordance with the guidance given by the Chief Financial Officer. That's what the Constitution requires.
So for clarification, your first point was about revenue expenditure.
I'm sorry?
Your first point was about revenue expenditure. Whereas this is capital because it's in the capital programme.
Yes, I don't think we've got to the point of covering off the detailed project plan and the costs. We can't get to that point until we've carried out the tender process, and then that will be, I'm assuming, brought back to Cabinet for their approval, because it will then at that point identify whether our estimates that have been provided are sufficient or not. So I don't think we have got to that point yet. And in terms of revenue, it will identify as well as part of that process, hopefully, that there will be a reduction in any revenue costs as a result of the works that are being carried out, as Councillor Adams referred to, in terms of, so like we'll make it more, reduce the carbon emissions from the works that are carried out.
So where it says in 4.13, a scheme and estimates. So I take your point with regard to quotations and hard responses, hard replies to tenders when you're preparing a project plan. And I take your point, we haven't reached that point in the process yet. But 4.13 deals with estimates.
Yes, and full council approved that for the 23-24 capital programme of £1 million. That was considered to be the original estimate that we included for the works and repairs to the Rocket House. And, you are at any point in time, you have an initial proposal, and that has to be worked up into a detailed proposal.
So it's your response in other words that we haven't reached that point in the process. Is that correct?
Yeah, the detailed project plan and the detailed costs, we haven't got to that point until we've carried out the tender exercise, and as part of the tender exercise we would get a plan of works and the time it would take to complete those.
Mr. Holliday, does that respond to your question?
It does say at the head of the page, we're talking about budgeting, capital budgeting. So I feel like we're I'm regarding this in as a one step ahead of perhaps of Officer Stankley's. I think we're both right. I think if the cabinet is going to be discussing spending £1 million, it should have this information to hand. And I think it's upstream from what you're saying.
Can I just say, someone put this to me recently about having all of the capital programs, all of the details within the budget. Just imagine how high that pile of papers would be for the budget or council meeting. There would be an awful lot to wade through there. So, you have to deal with these things individually. I think that's sensible. I think that's the correct interpretation, to be honest. And I think that's common expectation. But I understand what you're saying. Do you do it at the budget setting or do you do it at a later date? But I think it's fair you actually do the procurement, you build the project, and then you have that level of detail. Thank you.
When I submitted an application for a capital bid, I had a survey, independent survey, that detailed a sum of money. And we're aware from other work that we do as a council in terms of repairing our facilities, what it is likely to cost to deal with the other elements. So it was based on that. It's a budget estimate cost, but we're now progressing through that process with more detailed surveys. And as we mentioned before, the next stage is the procurement and more detailed timelines. So we've already got a basic timeline, but once we go through that procurement stage with a contractor, they'll provide their own detailed timeline. So there is more work to be done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I just clarify then a couple of points that you made, Councillor Adams? You spent a bit of time talking about the building not washing its face, which is another way of saying that it won't pay its way on its own, and it will therefore rely on effectively a subsidy from this organisation, which is publicly funded, in order to meet its costs.
Sorry,
What?
Sorry,
Yes. What is the extent then that it won't wash its face? In other words, what is the likely input from this organisation in order to enable that building to cover its costs? What do we have to invest in revenue terms as well? We know what we're going to have to invest in capital terms, judging by what you've said today. What will be the revenue costs?
So we really need to think much broader than the leaseholders in there, because obviously we've talked about the fact that we've got the lifts and the toilets in there as well. Councillor Adams has spoken about the positioning against the cliff as well.
Yeah, we understand that.
I know that you understand that, but at this committee, I've previously been stopped from talking about the wider benefits that some of our assets have. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture there. So if we're talking about the maintenance of our toilets, are we talking about an increase in the maintenance of the toilets, or are we talking about the general maintenance which takes part as our toilet maintenance programme?
I can be simpler than that. Councillor Adams said that the building will not wash its face.
Fantastic. Okay, I can go back to that.
So that's where we start from.
Yeah.
And what I think the committee is entitled to know is, to what extent won't it wash its face? What will it cost this organisation?
In general. So I think we're probably misunderstanding the purpose for the actual building being built in the first place. The building wasn't built as a commercial asset. The building was actually, looking at the minute meetings from 2002, was built to replace the existing lifeboat shed that was there, to house the museum, to have a cafe space. Please, can you be respectful and stop interrupting?
We are dealing with the current day, and the question is, to what extent will this organisation have to contribute money in order for that building to cover its costs?
I ask that you treat me with respect and allow me to finish, because you're continually interrupting, and that's
I'm trying to keep us on target here, because time is ticking by, and the question was very simple. We are talking in today's terms, the building not washing its face.
I think you may as well ask. Yeah, I just think it's a very silly question, to be honest, because it's like asking you for, how much money does a public toilet make us? It doesn't, obviously, but it brings a lot of, it supports, I should say, it doesn't bring any, no one's going to visit for a public toilet, of course, but it supports the visitor economy. As you've heard earlier on, over 1.5 million visitors to Cromer last year. We've got income from our car parks, we've got income from other assets. So very easy to look at, how much does this car park make? How much does the pier make? What does the Rocket House, achieve for us on a balance sheet? But it's not that. And I think the history, the fact this was obviously grant funded, the purposes of the building are important here. Yes, it's a liability more than it's an asset in a sense, for us in terms of the balance sheet, what it looks like there, but it performs, a lot more for us, than just its income. I think it would be difficult to answer your question without talking about the future arrangements, with the leaseholders, to be honest, in terms of what income streams we get from both. And I don't think that would be appropriate, in this setting, because that's, of course, the income from this building. We're not going to get income from a public toilet or a lift. Sad to say, they might. Well, if you can think of some way, I'm all up for hearing that. But there might be some other ways within the building, but it's obviously a limited footprint. So that's the reality. It's not a revenue raising building that's going to make us a lot of money. I think that's just the facts. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I just wondered whether we're straying off the point again here, whether that particular sort of line of questioning is relevant to the call-in, which was around process.
It's about process and what information should have been contained within that process.
But I think asking for sort of future projections on
and that also
income is,
and that also is an application on when a statement is made, an understanding of to what extent won't the building wash its face.
Sorry, I'll defer for a moment.
We treat the building in 4 parts: cafe tenant, museum, lift, public toilets. We operate the building with a service charge. The tenants contribute towards that service charge. So that's the running of the building. So they contribute based on floor area. The council contributes to that service charge also, mainly to do with the running and maintenance of the public toilets and the lift. So that is the reason why it doesn't wash its face, because the lift and the public toilets, like other public toilets, aren't income producing.
I think we understand the reasons why it doesn't wash its face. It's the extent to which what it will cost this organisation in the future, particularly an organisation that's challenged from a revenue point of view. That's why it is a relevant issue to consider. Can I just ask you also, Councillor Adams, when you were responding to questions from the presenting members, you made more than once the statement that that information exists.
So what information?
I'm not able to tell you precisely what that was, but you'll know what questions you were asked.
What information was it you asked?
So we can try and cover I merely noted down, and I was going to ask you at the end of that question, can you tell us, in relation to the question that you were answering, you said that information exists.
What information, sir? What are we?
Well, I don't know, because you can't tell me.
Well, you can't tell me what you want, and I can't tell you what you know. It's sort of as simple as that.
We'll have to leave that one hanging.
I think we're drawing this out a little bit more than we need to now. I think we're sort of getting to the end. We're stretching this a bit further than we should. To be honest with you, we've made a logical decision based upon the facts. It's not a position we want to be in. We obviously don't want to be here. You know, we've come here through no fault of our own. You know, this certainly wasn't, you know, something any of us were involved in originally. It spanned multiple political administrations.
Councillor Adams, I'm going to stop you at that point
Well,
because I think
I'm
we
not
need to
clear what
move
you
on.
ask.
I think we need
Yes,
to move
that's
on.
exactly what I was saying. Thank
So,
you, I
so
agree.
can we just move on and can we just kind of keep focused and keep calm
I'm
and
absolutely fine.
objectively, it's not a joke.
But I'm
I
not
notice
sure what
you've
you're
laughed a
asking.
number of times, Councillor Adams. This isn't a funny business. You may find it funny, but actually it's very serious and it is very purposeful. A lot of people have taken a lot of time today to come along to carry out this piece of process. And I don't think it's appropriate for the leader of the council to find that funny and laugh at it, the process. So can we just draw a line at that point, please?
Well, no,
Any
I
more
don't think
questions
that's
from the
appropriate. I
committee?
don't think that's appropriate
Councillor
and
Howson.
to speak to me like that.
Well, it's appropriate. If you're going to laugh, then I think,
We've
you
asked
know,
you
this
questions.
is not a
Completely
laughing
valid.
matter. £1 million being spent is not a laughing matter.
Absolutely. And
So
I
I'm
certainly
going
didn't-
to move on.
Take an adjournment for 5 minutes because we're getting a bit heated.
Let's do that. Let's just take 5 minute break and we'll be back here at just gone 25 to 12. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity of taking an adjournment break. So we'll reconvene. But before I return back to item 6, I think it might be just useful to hear from the scrutiny officer just to sharpen our focus.
Chair, it's just to remind the committee that the question in front of you is the information that the Cabinet had at its meeting in April in relation to this issue, whether or not the information was sufficient for the Cabinet to make that decision at that time. And that, as I understand it, is the purpose of the call-in. And that is the question that the committee has in front of them. Is that a yes or is that a no in terms of what the Constitution says? So if perhaps the committee could focus in on that, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I was concentrating, but if you go through that again, Will, please.
It's in terms of the information that the Cabinet had at its meeting in April in terms of this issue. Was there sufficient information in that report to justify the decision that was made? So if I'm walking up, a member of the public walking up Cromer High Street, is there enough information in that report to say, yes, the council's made a decision based on that information? Was that decision justified in terms of that information or not? Depending on what the committee considers of the information at that meeting, at the April meeting.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you for that.
Right. So any further questions? And we're on item 6. That's members of the committee may question the Cabinet members and officers. Any more questions? Councillor Hazard.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was just going to raise a point, but as the scrutiny officers just outlined something slightly different, can we just have a point of clarity, please? The papers state that we're not including the lift, but in October 23, the press stated that the lift was being replaced. And also, can we just really, regarding your last discussion, the RNLI served notice in March 24. I just wonder if that was added, those 2 points could be just reiterated about the lift and the RNLI who had served notice as before the date of the Cabinet meeting, how that affects the process. That's not in the purple papers. It's in the main body of the papers.
Okay, so obviously, just to cover your last question first. Sorry, excuse me. Part of the reasoning behind the last items on the Cabinet agenda was to negotiate interim lease arrangement with the RNLI. Expect more information on that around the next Cabinet meeting. You know, I think this is important to say. This has been quite a long process, as Renata has said earlier on. It's been 2 years that some officers have worked on this. There's a lot of history, but there's a future as well. So some more information will be available on that in due course. It's hard to disclose more, I suppose, about the potential future lease arrangements at this stage, but it was certainly one of the pertinent points as to why we met in April to discuss the Rocket House, besides obviously the delegations, the officers, and as I said, keeping it the domain. In terms of the lift, I think it's fair to say we're hoping this might be one I want to delegate on, but it's hoping to be one that we can upgrade rather than replace. Obviously, taking the lift shaft out, it's quite a big project, as you can imagine. Inevitably, at some point, it would be needed. But if there are any savings that can emerge during the project, we will be seeking them. So there has been an issue with, and Councillor Cushing mentioned it earlier on, in relation to mobility scooters. They've got larger, heavier. When they hit the doors, it knocks them out. So it knocks the lift out of kilter. There's also been an issue with vandalism. Yeah, CCTV has been installed, as Lucy's just reminded me, and that's sort of kicked that into shape. So yes, with the best of intentions, years ago the lift was installed, And it's currently, you know, it's met that need for a long time. I should say there are 2 lifts in the building, not just the one. There's also the service lift for the business, for the cafe. And yeah, we've had a lot of problems in the last 2 years. So I don't want to tempt fate, but touch wood, it's been a lot better recently because it has been a nightmare, really, to be honest. There has been a lot of there's been a deluge of information, conversation, social media chatter. If I was to go out and try and correct all of it, even some of the last press reports, you know, we didn't want to forcibly go out and say, well, this is actually the reality. We wanted to focus on the matter at hand. So yes, there have been things that I mentioned briefly earlier on. Structural failure, you know, it's not fair to say there's a structural failure. The building's not going to collapse. There were some miscommunications around the leases, and all sorts of other things that, to be honest, we've let slide a little bit. But there will be an opportunity as this progresses to, I suppose, correct.
Okay, thank you.
I think you just switch it on rather than off. Thank you. Any other questions? No, we're all done. Right, and we'll move on then to item 7 of the process. So those members who have called in the decision will have collectively 5 minutes at the end of the debate to sum up their arguments. Again, this may be individual or one of them to do that. Councillor Cushing, have you decided how you want to do that?
I'm happy to lead, Mr. Chair, if I may. I won't use up the 5 minutes. I was reflecting on this. The Saturday after the decision was made, there was a letter, the lead letter in the EDP from a Mrs. Dawn Gibson of Fakenham, who's well known in Fakenham resident. And I hasten to add, I hadn't had a conversation with Mrs. Gibson before she wrote it, but she wrote the letter, lead letter, out and outline, which saying the decision on Rocket House is a complete waste of money. There are far better things this council can spend its money on. Obviously, we've heard arguments here today to the contrary to that. But how would Mrs. Gibson know of the arguments to the contrary based on the evidence that's been put in the public domain prior to this decision being made? There was very little, as we've done to death, in terms of what was actually in the cabinet report that went to the 15th of April meeting. There's all the other information was in purple papers. Key aspect of any council's decisions that this cabinet or full council make should be transparent when you're spending taxpayers' money. And it is their money. There's not one penny this council has which doesn't come from taxpayers one way or another. So doesn't she deserve to know? Now, if that information and some of the information which you've articulated today had been in your report and that we've requested, and the key thing which we still haven't got clarity on whether we are likely to get it or not, would have been a cost benefit analysis explaining how that 830,000 is going to be spent and what the benefits for doing that are. You said that the building does not wash its face, but you've outlined other benefits, potentially intangible benefits. Well, fine, they're benefits, articulate them. That could have been in the paper. And if we'd have done that, and if you'd have done that, we would have had to spend all our time this morning sitting here debating these things. So I think that's the takeaway lesson for now and for the future. I would say this, simply because something goes in the capital programme and we approve it at the annual council, it really doesn't mean whether it's in the constitution or not, that if you're going to take that money out and spend it, you need to justify it. There are 80 odd other items on that capital programme. We didn't go through each one of those line by line, nor would be expected to. So it circles back down to the fact, business case is what we've asked for. And I think if you provide that, perhaps a lot of the heat and the noise that we've had here this morning would disappear. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So that concludes item 7. Moving to item 8, Cabinet members given the opportunity to give a final response. So 5 minutes you have.
Okay, well, I don't think I'll take that long. So, I just reiterate, a lot of what I've said previously. The scope of our consideration is outlined in the purple papers. There's been a lot of consideration over this for some time, and an enviable process. Probably well, certainly one I didn't expect to face. And I've been honest and open with a number of people. Had I known about the scale of the challenges we faced here, might not have taken the job on that I currently have. It was not in the plan, as it were. But it's right after this amount of time that we deal with this this issue once and for all. I understand, you know, if there will be public concern about that amount of expenditure, but to reiterate, it will cost us more if we take a different path. You know, I appreciate the individual members of the public that may disagree with the expenditure, but you know, equally, there are many members of the public that support us doing this work, and we've heard from many of them. Some of them wanted to speak to you today. The MP is fully supportive of us doing this work, and he's pinned his colours very firmly to the mast on that as well, and grateful to his support in dealing with the RNLI families and members of the public that needed that support as well. We've tried to justify this not just on financial grounds, but the logical consideration really of the alternative options. And as I've said, you know, in the most recent answer of Councillor House, that there is more detail that will emerge in following cabinet meetings, including the lease arrangements. We've got the tender, the procurement will help yourselves, but also members of the public, the wider community, businesses, have a greater understanding of the issues. And you know, I hope we've managed to outline the real considerations we've had to grapple with in the last 2 years over this issue. I'm sorry also, it's, you know, it's been a painful process for you know, the tenants and the volunteers of the building as well. You know, it's certainly been a difficult position for everyone to be in. We have to go through the governance process. We have to procure. We have to cost. We have to weigh up these options, and you know, we've done that to the best of our ability. There's still work to be done here, but I'm confident this building has a long future ahead of it, with everything contained within it as well. Thank you for the opportunity today. Appreciate it's been a bit fraught at times. We haven't had one of these meetings in some time, as in it calling. And I look forward to a future ONS meeting where perhaps we can discuss the progress of the project. And we will, of course, take a further discussion to the cabinet meeting on the 13th of May, following this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And that takes us then to item 9 on our process. And I should just point out that at this point in the process, Councillors Cushing and Vickers cease to be presenting members and will resume their role as committee members. So if you had a hat on, you can change your hats, but that's what it means in process terms. You are now a committee member, and we'll move on to so 9. The chairman will invite contributors from the committee, contributions from members of the committee in the order they wish to speak. There shall be no limitation on the numbers of times that a member speak, but the chairman may curtail a member if a point has been made by that member earlier in the debate or is otherwise not relevant to the matter under consideration. So I think it might be just time to go back to the focus on the core issue here. The focus on the core issue is the process leading to the decision. So that's the process containing the information that was supporting the decision. And so the covering information for that is set out in the papers, and we've heard from the cabinet member and the leader and the officer up to now on the questions that have been asked of them. So over to the, excuse me, over to the committee for who wishes to speak. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we had our little break, you were trying to drill down on the expenditure and income of the Rocket House and its benefits. I assume that there was a relevant business case produced for this building when it was first procured and commissioned. I'd just like to ask, in what way do we think any of those thoughts may have changed?
I think we probably need to clarify the process here.
The process is for the committee to consider what it's heard and then moves on in terms of a recommendation.
So this isn't about asking further information. I think we've heard from cabinet members. I think your point is one that you're raising for a matter for discussion amongst the committee. Is that correct?
Yes, because the point of paragraph 9 is to enable that debate. And then when you get to 10, it's then what recommendation you want to find in terms of the debate you've had. And the three options are set out in paragraph 12 that you can take under the council's constitution.
So is any discussion that really would lead us towards that making a recommendation?
I apologise, Mr. Chairman, if I've managed to come in at the wrong time.
I don't think you've done. I don't think you've done that. I think your point is perfectly legitimate. It's just how do you want that to be, if you like, articulated? Do you want that to be a feature in future in the recommendation, for example, or what would you like to have happen to that?
No, Mr. Chairman, I just thought it was a relevant point that perhaps we needed to know. So if it's not relevant at this moment, I withdraw it.
Okay.
I wonder whether it would be helpful to go back to what the purpose of the call-in is or the reasons for the call-in to help members decide what sort of decision they may need to make. So the reason for the call-in was brought because it's been suggested by those bringing the call-in that the decision on the works to the Rocket House building was made without sufficient supporting evidence being made available in public, namely an options appraisal and a detailed business case. And we've heard the responses from the decision makers, the members of cabinet and the officers attending. And so members need to consider whether that supporting evidence, was it necessary? Was it there? And if so, how important was it that it should be in public, or was it reasonable that, for example, there was an overriding reason why it should be exempt? What was the extent of that information, and did the decision makers have sufficient information to make the decision that they did in April? So I think they're the things that you're looking at, and you may wish to, in section 9, make contributions in regard to those areas at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looking slightly ahead towards the recommendations or the options for those. If we were, as a committee, minded to take no further action in the case, in which case it goes, the original cabinet decision will be effective immediately. And then, as I understand it, the tender process would begin, the procurement process would begin, that we get on with that. If those quotes come back and they are in excess of the 830,000, that may happen. Could you just outline what's the process then Does, if there's an uplift that is necessary, does that come back to full council? Does it come here? Can you just articulate that? Because I have a suspicion that might happen, but I'd be very keen to get this out to tender.
Officer.
Thank you, sorry, thank you. If we got the tenders in and there was an increased amount, then we would come back to cabinet. I would need advice whether that would need approval from full council. I'm not certain on that point, but yes, there would be a further report if the sum varies. Thank you.
I think it would depend on the size of the increase of the amount, whether it would then need to go to full council.
Do you have any idea on what that size of increase might be? Is it 10%? Is it?
Was it Officer Spankley here who may be able to?
Thank
help?
you.
Yeah, I think the constitution outlines this in terms of we have an approved budget of the £1 million. Anything in excess of what the £1 million, you know, if as soon as we anticipate exceeding that, we either take measures to reduce it below the 1 million, or if that is not possible, we would then need to seek full council approval, as it would be in addition to the capital programme, which needs full council approval.
I think you probably might want to think about whether that's actually germane to the recommendation that, or the matter that we're considering today. The implications of what we're considering today are probably not for us to kind of work through. We really need to be working towards a recommendation which reflects where we are today, rather than where we might be in 9 months' time or whenever. Right. Councillor Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is quite difficult looking at recommendations, because I think if you have a background, you know, in business and in property, you can understand perhaps, or I can understand that some of this appears to be in a vacuum and with that sufficient information. And although I wasn't a party to it, I don't, in my opinion, see that there was sufficient information come back to the position we're in. I think the thing is as well that if you're not in a position of understanding that, this is a difficult case, because at some point you have to rely on other people properly to investigate and to come back with the information. I'm neither criticising anybody in this, but it comes back, I'm afraid, to this point that we've come to so many times about information coming into committees. And it is a very difficult one, because the information I would like to see, I would like to know what the indemnity is from the structural engineer, because we might have to call on that indemnity if something should fail in the building later on. Councillor Penfold might not even have the slightest concern about that. But the point is, it is fundamental to what we're looking at here, and what we're looking at in the context of this council's deficit, budgetary deficit, and the fact, in my personal opinion, 1.5 million isn't going to cover this. That's my personal opinion. And I just think this is a very difficult situation, and the recommendations have got to be considered very carefully, because this isn't going to stop at this call-in. I really think that.
Okay. I mean, I think just for clarity, I think that we can rule out one of the recommendations, and that I think is B. So if it simplifies matters and steers us in any better direction, then we are looking at a recommendation A or C, or any other recommendation that might be felt to be appropriate, but that would have to obviously have its own set of reasons and grounds for it. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that I think we can agree on, and we've pulled out of today, is that this is a complicated business. And I sort of come back to a point that I made in my original presentation, is around an audit trail. If you look at the decisions that are being made by the cabinet, I do think it would be helpful for the future to understand the premise upon which the decision was based. So if you look at what we have in the cabinet paper of the 15th of April, the whole point of this is we don't believe that is there. I suspect there will be further debates down the line around costs and estimates. And at the moment, we don't really, other than that headline figure of 830, have any baseline for any of those individual costs to look at. So I think it would be very helpful if we did refer it back to the cabinet to ask them to pull that together in terms of a business case. And I do think it'd also be helpful for members of the public to understand those wider benefits. We've made it clear that there may not necessarily be a financial benefit to this, but there are other ones which have been articulated. If you put that in the business case as well, that may well help people as well. So I believe that my view is the whole point, I suppose, of the call in was, I suppose, if we look at option A, well, that's the option that I would suggest we favour. Thank you.
Are you proposing that as a? Anybody wants to add to that? Do you have a, sorry, Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, going back to what Officer White has said, I mean, just going through the September and the April papers, I don't think there's the requisite information there to make the decision. We've heard it this morning, but it wasn't there at the time, even in the private papers, I don't think, actually. And so I would second Councillor Cushing's recommendation.
You will second?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a recommendation with a proposer and a seconder. Would be appropriate to put it to the vote at this stage. So can I have a?
What was the recommendation?
Yeah, what's the
sorry?
Sorry, we were just conferring on something. What was the recommendation?
You put your mic on, please.
Yeah, sorry, what was the recommendation?
Recommendation is to follow effectively recommendation 12A.
Yeah.
Yep. Which so for clarity, refer it back to the decision-making body, personal body for reconsideration, normally in time for its next scheduled meeting, and I believe that's the 13th of May, the next cabinet meeting. Setting out in writing the nature of its concerns and any alternative recommendations. So that's that's the recommendation that Councillor Cushing has proposed. Councillor Holliday has seconded. Councillor Enfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on process again, because I would like to propose recommendation C. So do we vote on recommendation A first and then we come to C?
Case, having
so do I propose that after the first vote or now? Okay, thank you.
So having duly proposed and second the recommendation 12A, can I have a show of hands then in support of that? Those against? Any abstentions? No, I think everybody has voted. Yeah. Right, so that's lost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to propose a vote on recommendation 12C, please.
You are indeed in order to do that.
Thank you very much.
Do you have a seconder? Could I second? Councillor Fletcher? Yeah. Thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder for option 12C. Can we have a show of hands, please? And those against? And there are no abstentions. Thank you. So the decision then from today's hearing is to take no further action, in which case the original cabinet decision will be effective immediately. Okay. I think in effect that concludes business today. So thank you all very much indeed for your attendance and input today.